Good evening, everyone. I hope this message reaches you in a moment of calm, because what unfolded in West Africa today feels less like a news update and more like watching the ground split beneath an entire region. The kind of fracture we have seen before across Africa. We watched it happen in Mali. We saw the tremors in Burkina Faso under Ibrahim Traoré. We felt the shockwave ripple through Niger. But this time, something different happened. Something that should make every single person watching this video sit up and pay attention, because what occurred in Benin was not just another coup attempt. It was a revelation. A pulling back of the curtain that exposed the machinery operating behind African sovereignty. Imagine a storm roaring toward a coastline, waves rising higher and higher, thunder shaking the air, lightning splitting the sky, and then suddenly, without any warning, the storm collapses on itself. It doesn't fade away naturally. It doesn't blow itself out over time. It simply stops, as if someone somewhere flipped a switch. That is exactly what happened in Benin this past Sunday. A coup that looked for a brief and absolutely terrifying moment, like it was destined to succeed, simply shattered in a matter of hours. Coup leaders appeared on national television at sunrise, declaring a new order. By midday, they were fugitives running for their lives. Power was lost, regained, and questioned all before the sun completed its arc across the sky. One single day that revealed more about the true power structure in West Africa than 1,000 diplomatic statements ever could. But the real shock, the detail that should concern every person who cares about sovereignty and independence, is not what happened on the streets of Cotonou. It is what moved behind the curtains, what happened in private phone calls, what decisions were made in foreign capitals that shaped the outcome of what was supposed to be an internal African matter. A president who vanished without explanation while his nation burned. A government that claimed total control while offering none of the clarity that control requires. A foreign embassy that became a fortress in the heart of an African capital. And fighter jets, yes, military jets, from a neighboring nation appearing above Benin's airspace within hours after a single phone call from a European leader. If that doesn't make you question who truly holds power in West Africa, then I don't know what will. Tonight, we are going to look at a coup that failed but exposed something far more dangerous than any military takeover could ever be. We are going to examine the hidden hands, the external strings, the invisible decisions shaping the fate of millions of people who never get a say in their own destiny. Before we continue, let me remind you that if you want more deep, unfiltered analysis on African news, on nations standing up for sovereignty like Burkina Faso under Ibrahim Traoré, consider subscribing to this channel. We move slowly here. We move clearly and truthfully. And we never look away from the uncomfortable questions that mainstream media refuses to ask. By the time the first rays of Sunday morning touched the streets of Cotonou, the soldiers had already moved into position. It was that quiet hour before dawn, an hour when most nations breathe softly, unaware that history is rearranging itself in the shadows. Lieutenant Pascal Kupaglo Tigri and the small group he called the Military Committee for Reformation stormed the state television building before most people had opened their eyes. Their message was crafted, rehearsed, and delivered with the confidence of men who believed destiny had opened a door specifically for them. They declared the Constitution suspended, Parliament dissolved, borders closed. A new order rising from the ashes of corruption and foreign influence. The language was powerful. The imagery was dramatic. The presentation was smooth. But for all its theater, for all its staged firmness and revolutionary rhetoric, the coup never held anything stronger than a microphone and a camera. What the world saw on television screens that morning was not the image of a government collapsing under the weight of military force. It was the illusion of power without substance. The soldiers had seized the stage, but not the state. They controlled a single building with a broadcast tower, nothing more. They held no ministry buildings, no military headquarters, no presidential residence, no logistical network, no support from the broader armed forces, just one building and the temporary attention it provided. And in West Africa today, especially in the post-Burkina Faso, post-Niger, post-Mali era, where we have seen real structural change, you cannot overthrow a government with only a broadcast signal. The coups that succeeded in those nations succeeded because they were rooted deep in the armed forces, in the streets, in genuine public frustration that had been building for years. They were not theatrical performances, they were structural earthquakes. This one in Benin was not. Still, for several critical hours, the entire nation felt frozen in place. The most agonizing moment came not from the coup statement itself, but from what followed. Silence. An absence. A void where leadership should have been. No one knew where President Patrice Talon was, and governments fall in silence long before they ever fall to bullets. That vacuum, that emptiness, at the heart of power, created a sense of dread that rippled across the entire region. Embassies began warning their citizens. Streets emptied as people stayed indoors. Social media flooded with speculation, rumors, and fear. Even seasoned analysts who have watched West Africa for decades whispered the question that terrified everyone. Has Benin joined the dominoes? Has another nation fallen to the wave of military takeovers reshaping the Sahel? And then slowly, piece by piece, the truth emerged. The president was not hiding in some secure bunker beneath the capital. He had not mobilized loyal forces to mount a defense. He had not addressed his nation in its moment of crisis. He had fled. He ran to the French embassy. In the moment when the state he governed was being tested by fire, he sought shelter under a foreign flag. And that detail, that single choice, turned a political crisis into something far more symbolic and far more damaging. Because in Africa news today, nothing is more revealing than where a leader runs when the sky turns dark. Nothing tells you more about true allegiances than the door someone chooses when they are afraid. Inside the government compound, loyal forces were moving quickly to contain the situation. They secured the presidential residence, cut off potential escape routes for the plotters, and launched an operation to recapture the television building. By midday, Interior Minister Alassane Seydu appeared on the very same broadcast network the coup plotters had seized just hours earlier. His message was simple and direct. The coup has failed. Order is restored. Constitutional authority has been maintained. But by that point, the story was no longer just about Benin. Something extraordinary was happening in the sky above the nation. Something that changed the entire context of what this coup attempt really meant. Nigerian fighter jets were scrambled from Lagos. They crossed into Benin's airspace without hesitation to conduct what they called surveillance runs over the capital and surrounding regions. That action, carried out within hours of the initial coup broadcast, stunned every intelligence watcher and military analyst in the region. Nigeria is powerful, certainly. Nigeria has capacity. But Nigeria is rarely this fast, rarely this aggressive, rarely this willing to send military aircraft over a sovereign neighbor without extensive negotiation, without regional consultation, without the usual diplomatic protocols that govern such sensitive actions. And then, the missing puzzle piece arrived. The detail that makes everything else make sense. French President Emmanuel Macron had called Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu just before those jets were launched into Benin's airspace. One phone call. That is all it took. You can draw your own conclusions about what that means. Most viewers watching this already have. But let us be absolutely direct and clear about what we witnessed. If a foreign leader can make one phone call and activate military aircraft from another African nation, if that intervention can happen within hours, if it can bypass every normal channel of African decision-making, then who is truly protecting democracy in West Africa? And who is dictating it? Who is defending sovereignty? And who is managing it from a distance? This is where the story deepens into something far more troubling than a failed coup. Because while loyalist forces were restoring order inside Benin, external forces were shaping the outcome above it. The speed was remarkable. The synchronization was flawless. The confidence was absolute. It looked less like an emergency response and more like a prearranged protocol. Something that had been prepared in advance. Something that had been rehearsed. Something that was simply waiting for the right moment to be activated. And when you start to see patterns like that, when you start to notice how quickly foreign powers can move when their interests are threatened, you begin to understand that what we call independence in West Africa may be something far more complicated than the word suggests. And yet, beneath all these geopolitical maneuvers and military deployments, the coup itself unraveled in the simplest possible way. Tigray and his men had no institutional support. Soldiers across the country refused to defect to their cause. Commanders stayed loyal to the government. The armed forces did not fracture along the lines the plotters needed. The people did not rise up in support. There were no crowds in the streets celebrating liberation. It was the exact opposite of what happened in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso under leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, where public sentiment and military unity created the perfect storm for change. This was not a storm. This was a spark, and the government stamped it out before it could touch dry grass. But do not let the speed of suppression fool you into thinking this means nothing. Sparks appear where there is friction. Sparks appear where something beneath the surface is heating up beyond control. Sparks appear where governments lose their legitimacy long before they lose their power. And West Africa has become a continent of sparks. Small fires breaking out in unexpected places. And the question that should concern everyone is not whether they can be put out quickly. The question is why they keep starting in the first place. Before we move forward, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from right now? Whether you are in Texas, Florida, New York, or anywhere else across America or around the world, your perspective matters, because this story is bigger than borders. This story is about power, about influence, about who really makes decisions when nations face crisis. And I want to know what you think. Do you believe that phone call was coincidence? Do you think those jets would have launched without French pressure? Share your thoughts honestly in the comments below. The hours after a failed coup are often more important than the coup itself. That is when shadows lengthen. That is when decisions get made quietly behind closed doors. That is when a nation chooses whether to confront its problems honestly or bury them beneath fresh layers of authority and control. Benin now stands at that exact crossroads. And the direction it chooses will shape not only its own fate, but the future of an entire region that is already trembling with change. The immediate road ahead looks deceptively calm. The government will claim triumph. ECOWAS will celebrate the restoration of constitutional order. Foreign partners will applaud stability being maintained. Press releases will flow. Diplomatic statements will praise democratic resilience. But beneath those polished words and official narratives lie the unresolved fractures that caused this explosion in the first place. Soldiers who feel betrayed by their leadership. Citizens who feel unheard by their government. A political class that has tightened its grip on power rather than earned the trust that power requires. And hovering above it all is the growing fear that the next crisis will not be contained so easily. That next time the phone call might not work. That next time the jets might not be enough. If Benin wants a different future, it must do what few governments in this region have been willing to do. It must address the conditions that sparked the coup, instead of simply hunting down the men who carried it out. That means transparency in governance. That means protections for opposition voices. That means genuine reforms in military ranks. That means an honest reckoning with how deeply foreign influence shapes national decisions. Because if Benin does not define its own path forward, someone else will. Whether in Abuja, in Paris, or in capitals much farther away. Across the border in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré speaks often about sovereignty as a survival strategy. Whether you agree with his methods or not, the idea resonates with millions of people who feel their nations have been managed, nudged, or pressured by powers whose interests lie far from African soil. That resonance is not shrinking, it is growing, which raises the question Benin must now confront directly. Will it continue as a bastion of the old regional order, aligned tightly with external partners and dependent on foreign protection? Or will it embrace the rising call for autonomy that is sweeping across West Africa like a wave that cannot be stopped? Either path carries enormous risk. But pretending the old world still exists, pretending that colonial relationships have been truly severed, pretending that sovereignty means something other than what the word actually means, that is the most dangerous path of all. Because if this coup attempt proved anything, it proved that the ground in West Africa is shifting. And nations that do not adapt to shifting ground eventually fall through it. As the sun set over Cotonou on that day of crisis and revelation, a strange quiet settled over the region. It was not the quiet of peace. Peace breathes naturally. This was the quiet of uncertainty. The kind that follows an earthquake when you cannot tell whether the earth is done shaking or whether it is simply gathering strength for something larger. And in that silence, a truth emerged that no official statement can erase. Benin may have stopped a coup, but it did not stop the forces that created it. Because coups do not begin with soldiers storming television stations. They begin with fractures, political fractures, social fractures, fractures created by foreign influence that never truly left. They begin in parliaments that silence opposition voices. They begin in militaries that feel ignored and disrespected. They begin in governments that seek refuge in foreign embassies instead of standing with their own people. And when a nation ignores those fractures, when it papers over them with emergency laws and security crackdowns, the cracks do not disappear. They widen, they deepen, and eventually they break through. So here is the reality that many analysts are whispering privately, but few dare speak aloud. If Benin continues down its current path, this will not be the last rupture. It may not even be the most significant one. The next shock may not come from a small group of soldiers with grievances. It may come from the people themselves. Or it may come from a shifting regional landscape where old alliances crumble faster than governments can rebuild them. France cannot hold this region together forever. Nigeria cannot police every border. ECOWAS cannot issue enough statements to stop a tide that has been building for decades. The power struggle shaping West Africa's future is deeper, older, and far more volatile than the institutions trying to contain it. Which leads to the question that should genuinely unsettle every person watching this video. If a single phone call can decide the fate of a nation today, what happens tomorrow when those calls stop working? What happens when the influence runs out? What happens when African nations finally say, enough? This is where I really want to hear from you, because your voice matters more than official narratives, more than diplomatic language, more than carefully crafted headlines. Do you believe West Africa is entering a new era of genuine sovereignty or a new era of deeper instability? Which one do you see coming? Speak boldly and honestly in the comments below. The truth is never found in silence. And if you want more deep, unfiltered breakdowns of African news, of the leaders reshaping the continent like Ibrahim Traoré, of the patterns the world refuses to honestly confront, then consider subscribing to this channel. Hit that notification bell. This journey is just beginning. The next chapter will be even more revealing. Until next time, stay alert, stay thoughtful, and most importantly, stay unafraid to question everything you are told.